Hey guys, thanks for watching the Guides Network once again. We're going to bring you another in-depth tutorial, technique-driven deal. This is one we've never done before. We're going to talk about how to fish a jerkbait. Alright, how to fish a jerkbait. Now, a lot of you guys know, if you watch the channel, I like to fish grass a lot. The jerkbait that I'm going to focus on today is more of a shallow water deal. It's in the classification, kind of like the old Rattling Rogue. But the one that I primarily use is a 6 cents Provoke series jerkbait. If you get really light line and a long cast, you can get it down about 4 feet depth-wise. Most of the time, you're going to run it anywhere from 2 to 3 foot below the surface. Over grass flats, on the edges of grass, it's phenomenal. I'll show you guys a few of the baits themselves that I use. This is my main one, especially in the fall of the year when they're really focused on shad. I like to go to, this is the Ghost Pro Shad Color from 6 cents. But that's the main one that I'm going to use most of the time. The vast majority, that's going to be the bait I turn to, especially in the fall. Now, you guys have all seen and heard about the clown colors and the crazy, you know, bright yellow and silver and red color that, you know, a lot of people use in the pre-spawn time, you know, early spring time of year. This is one that I'm really fond of. I've turned to it over the hard clown color. This is called Ghost Clown. This is also same bait, 6 cents Provoke series jerkbait. Same quality as the other ones, exact same bait, just different color. But as you can see, it's like a little faded red, pinkish, faded yellow on top, and kind of a translucent body. That bait catches a lot of fish in that cold water time of year when I'm fishing those pre-spawn fish on a jerkbait. That's my #1 choice. And then the one that I go to in between, when it's super cold and nasty, in between fall and early spring, the dead of winter, when the water's in the lower end of the 40s around here, which for this area, the lower 40s is about as cold as it usually ever gets. Just a few times does it ever get into the 30 degrees range on the water temps around here. But when that water's in the lower 40s and it's really cold, I want a really subtle jerkbait, I turn to a Rapala Shad Wrap. And I actually do some things with it. I'll show you guys here. I've got some lead dots right here and some lead dots right here. Keep them right in the center of the bait. That allows the bait to balance and keep the same action. But what that does is this bait will float to the surface. When I put these lead dots to it, I've got just enough to dead suspend. And the only way I know to tell you to get that thing to suspend is you have to play. Because even from one bait to the next, sometimes it takes a different amount of lead dots to make that bait suspend perfectly. But I do that because when it's dead cold, I want that action where that bait does its jerking and it's twitching and I'm snapping it down there. And when I stop it, I want it to sit dead still when that water's that cold. I don't want it to rise up. I don't want it to move away from them at all. I want it to sit right in their face. And so that's why I add those lead dots. But when it's cold, you can fish this just like you do any other jerkbait, snatching it and all that good stuff. But longer pauses, a little bit more subtle twitches, and this bait will catch them in cold water. Alright, for the gear that I'm using, probably the most important is going to be your line on this deal. You know, it's a hard fight here because we're fishing around grass. There's wood everywhere in Lake Fork. The cover is just, for every tree that you see, there's 50 more that you can't see within sight. So we have a lot of hard cover, a lot of heavy cover that we have to deal with when we're trying to get these fish to the boat. You know, a lot of people fish a jerkbait on 6-pound line, 8-pound line, 10-pound line. The lightest I ever go, and this is usually I try to go as light as I can get away with on a jerkbait. But 12-pound fluorocarbon is what I like to fish on Lake Fork with a jerkbait. And I really like to fish 15, but most of the time I use 12. You start getting to 15 and that line begins to overpower the action on that bait. It doesn't have as much subtle jerk and subtle kick that you want out of a jerkbait. So I go 12-pound fluorocarbon for that reason. On the rod, Limit 5 series, that's my brand, that's my rods. I love these rods. They're so sensitive. You can feel the lightest little tick. Even sometimes on slack line you can feel them tick it. It's a very sensitive rod. The one that I'm using for a jerkbait is a 610 medium heavy. It is a medium heavy, that's what the label says, but it's not quite a medium. It's kind of in between medium and medium heavy. It's a very light medium heavy is I guess what I'm trying to say. But you want a rod that has some tip, and I'll show you the action here in a minute that we're working on these retrieves. You need a rod that's got some, you know, some give up here. It's got some wiggle at the top end. That's important. You don't want to rip that bait away from them. And even down here, this rod is not a real meaty rod down on the bottom end either. It's a pretty bendy rod. That's important. These fish are biting this jerkbait a lot of time. They're slapping at it. They're not getting the hook real good. They're biting it real subtly, and they're not super aggressive when you're fishing a jerkbait most of the time. So for that reason, you need that forgiveness in that rod to help you keep them buttoned up. All right, let's talk about some of the areas that I'm going to target with the jerkbait. You know, right now we're in that early fall transition. We've got a little bit of an early fall moving period happening right now. The water's much cooler than it usually is. We're in the middle of September. And today's literally the first day that I got that jerkbait bite. That's going to progress. A jerkbait is a staple every fall. It works every year that time. So it's something that I know is going to be coming to us. So this is a technique you can take to East Texas lakes or Lake Fork specifically and fish it over the next few months, and it's going to work. Right now where those fish are they're utilizing secondary points and grass lines towards the mouths of the major creek arms. They're using these little nooks and crannies that these grass lines are creating as they go into these little cuts and these little coves and pockets out at the mouth of these creeks. They're using those points and grass edges is where they're setting up. That's where they're traveling. That's where the bait fish are. And that's just kind of what we're focusing on right now. And when I'm fishing a jerkbait, wind is very important. So for right now, for the next few weeks, when I'm fishing this jerkbait, it's going to be on wind-blown secondary points on the outer halves of the big creeks. That's where I'm going to be throwing this. Wind is a big, big factor. That's important. You know, the good thing about a jerkbait is this time of year in the fall, it can catch bigger fish. As we saw today, the biggest fish of the day came on the jerkbait. That's just, you know, that's its MO. That's why I like to throw it when I throw it. I throw it in the fall, I throw it in the winter, I throw it in the early part of spring because that's when a jerkbait will catch big fish. You can catch fish on jerkbait year round. But those time of years, as the water cools off, there's something about that colder water time of year where jerkbait draws bigger bites than a lot of other baits. You know, as we get into winter, we'll fish those jerkbaits out on main lake points with deep drops. We're going to go to some jerkbaits that maybe dive a little deeper, completely different type of deal. And then as we get back into spring, we'll fish them back up shallow again. And actually, the area that we're sitting in right now is a perfect example of where to throw a jerkbait. There's actually, you can kind of see a grass edge here. There's a grass edge over there. And in the middle of this grass edge, there's a ditch, a creek that runs through here, swings around and cuts and breaks off into different ditches and sloughs. This is the type of area I want to focus on in the pre-spawn, where you have that deeper water, just a little bit deeper, and you got that drain running through there and it's got that elevation change. This is a perfect area in the pre-spawn to throw a jerkbait. Like I said, right now, secondary points at the mouths of the creeks with grass and wind is where we're focusing on. All right, couple things when you're working this jerkbait that are going to help you get more bites. This part's very important. This is, you know, there's a lot. You can do a lot of different things with jerkbait. You could just reel it in if you wanted to. You could constantly jerk it if you wanted to. There's all different cadences and ways to fish it. It changes throughout the season, but there's a couple of factors that go along with every one of them that you cannot do without to draw more bites. Number one is a long cast. You want to get, this is a technique for more subtle fish, fish that aren't really aggressive. So you want to get that bait way away from your boat as far as possible. So we make us a long cast. Now, point your rod down. That's key factor number one. You always have that rod pointed down when you're jerking that jerkbait. If you don't point it down, that jerkbait will not dive. It will just kind of skid forward along the surface. If I hold that thing up here and snatch it, that bait's just going to shoot forward. It's not really going to dive and dart. And a jerkbait's action is a diving, slashing action. It will dive and stop and dive and stop. And that pause where it stops and just sits there, that's where you get your bites. So if you don't have that rod pointed down, you're not going to get near as many bites. Number two is, this is probably the most important one right here. When you snap that rod, it's very important for you to point that rod back at that bait. See how as soon as I tighten my slack up, I'm pointing right back at it. That's the most important part about when you're fishing that jerkbait. Even when I snap it multiple times, every time I'm taking that rod back to the bait every time. You can watch that bait right there. See how it darts and stops? But that's what's important though, that snapping and pointing. Snap, point, snap, point, snap, point, snap, point. You know, whether you're jerking it 2 times or 3 times or 10 times or 1 time. Whatever it is, every time you tighten that line up, point that rod back. When you feed that slack back to that bait's going to dart down when you pull on it, and when you feed that slack back, that's what makes it pop back up and look at them. So that bait's going to slash and pop, slash and pop, slash and pop. And that pop back up where it just jumps up and then sits there dead still, that is what triggers your jerkbait bites. So that's why it's very important to always snap that rod and point it back at them in between every single snap. Now, one other thing, guys, when you get a bite on a jerkbait, this is not a jig, this is not a Texas rig, it's not a big hooked bait. It has 3 small hooks on them. It's not hard to get those thin wire hooks to penetrate that meat on that fish's mouth, or sometimes his head, because they will slap at it a bunch. The one thing that's important is you don't want to go slamming that hook into them real hard. What you want to do is, I'm snapping, I feel his weight, I just want to pick up and burn that reel handle. Lift your rod up and burn that reel handle to get that bow in your rod and drive those hooks in with your reel. You've heard of reel setting? You're setting the hook with your reel handle. You just lift at a sideways angle and burn that reel. That's how you want to get the hook in. And then once you got it in them, it's just like fishing a crankbait or a rattle trap. Try to keep them down, try to keep them from jumping the best you can. Don't horse them to the boat. Remember, these hooks are small. You can rip them out if you pull too hard. That's another reason we throw a 12-pound line and a lighter action rod that we do, is to help us keep those hooks in that fish and to keep us from horsing them. So know your gear, get the right gear, play that fish out a little bit, and your landing percentage will go way up. Well, there you go, guys. Like I said, we haven't caught a lot of fish on a jerkbait. In fact, we just caught the first one today on a jerkbait, but that bite is coming. It will be here. It's already starting right now. It's going to continue to get better as fall goes on. This bait should be a staple throughout the fall and winter period for you. It's one that can be a little bit challenging. It's a slow bite, it's a subtle bite, but if you stick with it, it can pay off with some really big bites on really tough days. So get out there, put these tips that I give you to use, and see if you can't catch a few more giants on a jerkbait. Finally caught a good one today, huh, Justin?
Yes, we did.
That's a solid fish right there. And they're just built like me, baby. Thank you, fish. Hey, we really appreciate you watching the Guides Network as always. If you like this video, let us know. Hit a thumbs up, comment below, let us know what you thought of it. Let us know if you want to see something. If there's a technique you want to see, a certain lake you want to see us go to, whatever you guys want to see on this channel, that is what we want to give you. So let me know in the comments below. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time right here on Your Lake Fork Guide.